Husband whips pregnant wife 100 times while mistress films mother appears. She is city crime boss, a complete drama story. Hook, the concrete floor was so cold, it burned against her cheek. Emma Sullivan lay curled on her side, her arms wrapped desperately around her pregnant belly as blood seeped through her torn blouse. The abandoned mill groaned in the winter wind, its broken windows letting in gusts that cut through her like knives. Behind her, she heard the crack of leather against air. Her husband Richard was testing the whip again, enjoying the sound it made. 97. Victoria counted from somewhere in the darkness, her voice dripping with cruel delight. Only 3 more to go, sweetheart. Emma had stopped screaming 20 lashes ago. She had stopped begging at 50. Now she simply held her unborn child and prayed that somehow, some way, her baby would survive even if she did not. The whip came down again. 98. Her back was on fire. Every nerve ending screamed, but Emma kept her hands pressed against her stomach, feeling the small movements inside. Still alive. Her baby was still alive. Richard Blackwell, the man she had married 5 years ago, the man who had promised to love and protect her, raised his arm for the 99th strike. His mistress Victoria stood beside him, phone raised, recording every moment of Emma's agony with a smile. They believed they were alone. They believed no witnesses existed. They believed Emma would die in this forgotten building and no one would ever know the truth. They had no idea that halfway across the city, a woman named Margaret Sullivan was watching a red dot on her screen, a dot that had not moved in 4 hours, a dot that represented the daughter she had spent 15 years protecting from a distance. They had no idea that Margaret Sullivan controlled the largest private intelligence network on the entire eastern seaboard. They had no idea that in exactly 11 minutes, the abandoned mill would be surrounded by armed men in black tactical gear. Justice was coming. And it would be far more brutal than anything Richard Blackwell could imagine. Value proposition. This story contains powerful lessons that could save your life or the life of someone you love. You will learn how to recognize the warning signs of an abusive relationship before it escalates. You will discover why documenting everything matters and how one piece of evidence can change your entire future. You will understand the importance of building a support network and why you should never confront a dangerous person alone. Most importantly, you will see that no matter how dark your situation becomes, no matter how trapped you feel, there is always hope. Help can come from unexpected places. Strength can emerge when you believe you have none left. Call to action. Before we continue, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stories like this one reach millions of people who need to hear them, but only when viewers like you help spread the word. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from today. Your engagement helps this channel grow, and growth means more stories that matter. Now, let us go back 72 hours before that terrible night in the abandoned mill. Let us see how Emma Sullivan, a woman who seemed to have everything, discovered that her perfect life was built on lies. Chapter 1. The Perfect Lie. The Blackwell estate glittered under a canopy of string lights as 200 of Connecticut's wealthiest families gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Crystal champagne flutes caught the light. Designer gowns swept across marble floors. Laughter echoed through rooms filled with priceless art and fresh flowers flown in from Holland. Emma Sullivan Blackwell stood at the center of it all, 7 months pregnant and radiant in a midnight blue dress that her husband had selected for her. She smiled at guests, accepted compliments on her pregnancy glow, and played the role of the perfect billionaire's wife with practiced ease. "Richard, you must be so excited about the baby," an elderly woman cooed, clutching Emma's hand. A little Blackwell heir at last. Richard Blackwell III appeared at Emma's side, all charm and white teeth. He placed a possessive hand on Emma's shoulder and squeezed just slightly too hard. "We could not be happier," he said smoothly. "Emma is going to be a wonderful mother." Emma kept her smile fixed even as his fingers dug into her skin. She had learned long ago not to flinch in public. Bruises could be explained, broken composure could not. As Richard guided her through the crowd, Emma caught sight of a young woman across the room. Victoria Crane, officially Richard's executive assistant, unofficially his mistress for the past 3 years. Victoria was beautiful in the predatory way of women who survived on the weakness of others. Tonight she wore red, a bold choice for someone who was supposed to be staff. Emma watched Victoria exchange a look with Richard, a look that lasted half a second too long. Something passed between them, something that made Emma's stomach turn. "Darling," Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You are staring. People will notice." Emma turned back to her husband. "I was not staring. You were. And you know how I feel about embarrassing me in public." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but perfectly clear. Emma had learned to read the warning signs in Richard's voice, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers pressed harder against her shoulder, the cold flatness that entered his eyes. She lowered her gaze. "Of course. I am sorry. That is better." Richard released her shoulder and picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter. He handed one to Emma, knowing she could not drink it. "A toast," he announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "To my beautiful wife and our growing family." Emma raised the glass to her lips and pretended to sip. Around her, guests applauded politely. No one noticed that her hand was trembling. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the caterers had begun cleaning up, Emma retreated to her private bathroom. She locked the door and finally allowed herself to breathe. In the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized. The Emma Sullivan, who had graduated top of her class from Yale Law School, who had once argued cases in front of federal judges, who had believed she could change the world through justice and advocacy. That woman was gone. In her place stood a hollow shell, beautiful and broken, trapped in a cage made of gold. She pulled up the sleeve of her dress and examined the finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm. Richard had been careful. He always was. He never hit her face. The marks he left could always be hidden beneath designer clothes. Emma opened the medicine cabinet and reached for her prenatal vitamins. But as she shook one into her palm, she noticed something strange. The pills looked different. The color was slightly off. The texture was wrong. Her heart began to pound. She grabbed her phone and searched the pill identifier website. What she found made her blood run cold. These were not prenatal vitamins. These were sedatives. Low dose, but dangerous for pregnancy. Someone had switched her medication. Emma stared at the pills in her hand as the truth crashed over her like a wave. Richard was trying to hurt the baby, her husband, the man who smiled and toasted and told everyone how excited he was to become a father, was secretly trying to harm their unborn child. She flushed the pills down the toilet and replaced the bottle with real vitamins from a hidden supply she kept for emergencies. Then she sat on the cold bathroom floor and let herself cry silently. One hand pressed against her stomach. "I will protect you," she whispered to her baby. "No matter what it takes, I will get us out of here." She just needed a plan. She needed evidence. She needed help. What Emma did not know was that help was closer than she realized. In a glass tower 20 miles away, her mother, Margaret Sullivan, was reviewing surveillance footage from 6 different cameras positioned around the Blackwell estate. Maggie had spent 15 years watching over her daughter from a distance. And tonight, something in Emma's body language had triggered every maternal alarm she possessed. Something was very wrong. And Margaret Sullivan had not built the most powerful intelligence network on the East Coast by ignoring her instincts. Chapter 2. The Discovery. 3 days after the charity gala, Emma sat alone in the Blackwell Estate's sunroom, pretending to read a pregnancy book while her mind raced through escape scenarios. Richard had left for work at 7 that morning. Victoria had arrived at 7:30, supposedly to review quarterly reports. Emma knew better. She had heard them in Richard's office, heard the sounds that no wife should have to hear through walls. But she said nothing. She did nothing. Not because she lacked courage, but because she was gathering ammunition. Her opportunity came just after noon. Richard's Apple Watch, the one he wore every day, the one synced to all his devices, sat on the kitchen counter where he had forgotten it. Emma glanced at the security camera in the corner of the room. She knew Richard monitored them from his phone. She knew he checked the footage every night, but she also knew the camera had a blind spot near the refrigerator. She had mapped every camera in the house over the past 2 years, slowly, carefully, waiting for the moment when that knowledge would matter. Emma walked to the refrigerator, opened it, and pretended to look for something to eat. With her body blocking the camera's view, she picked up Richard's watch and scrolled through his messages. What she found destroyed her. Message after message between Richard and Victoria. Explicit photographs, plans for the future, and then the conversation that changed everything. Victoria had written, "When are you getting rid of her?" Richard had responded, "After she has the baby. I need an heir. Then she is disposable." Victoria, "What about her baby, Richard?" "That is not my baby. I had a vasectomy 10 years ago. She must have cheated. She will pay for that." Victoria, "So what is the plan?" "Richard, I have been switching her vitamins. Nothing harmful enough to trace, just enough to cause complications. After the birth, she will have an accident. You will help me raise the child. Everyone will see us as the grieving widower and his devoted assistant turned second wife." Emma's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the watch. The baby was Richard's. She had never cheated, never even looked at another man. Vasectomies could reverse themselves naturally, a rare occurrence but medically documented. Her baby was a Blackwell by blood, but Richard did not know that. Richard believed she had betrayed him, and he was planning to murder her for it. Emma carefully returned the watch to its exact position. She walked back to her chair, picked up her book, and stared at the pages without seeing a single word. First value lesson. Here is your first lesson from Emma's story if something feels wrong in your relationship. Trust your gut. Document everything. Screenshot text messages, photograph injuries, save voicemails. Keep copies in a location your partner cannot access. You never know when you will need proof. And in legal battles, evidence is everything. That night, after Richard fell asleep, Emma crept to his home office. She knew his passwords. She had learned them over years of careful observation. She accessed his cloud storage and found years' worth of evidence. Financial records showing money moved to offshore accounts, emails discussing bribes to local officials, and most damning of all, a folder labeled insurance containing photographs and documents related to Richard's first wife. Sarah Blackwell had died in a car accident 8 years ago. The brakes had failed on a mountain road. Richard had collected $12 million in life insurance and inherited her family's real estate holdings. Now Emma found a receipt for cash payment to an auto mechanic dated 2 weeks before Sarah's death. She found text messages between Richard and the mechanic discussing brake lines. She found everything she needed to prove that Richard Blackwell had murdered his first wife. Emma copied every file to a hidden cloud account. Then she erased all traces of her access and returned to bed beside the man who was planning to kill her. Tomorrow, she would contact a lawyer. Tomorrow, she would begin building her escape. Tomorrow, everything would change. She fell asleep believing she finally had a way out. She had no idea that Richard already knew exactly what she was planning. Chapter 3: False Hope. The law offices of Morrison and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise. Emma had chosen them specifically because they were not connected to the Blackwell family in any way. She had driven herself, using back roads and checking her mirrors constantly for anyone following. The attorney who met her was a woman named Catherine Morrison, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for handling high-profile divorces. "Mrs. Blackwell," Catherine said after Emma had laid out everything she knew. "What you are describing is extraordinary. Murder, attempted murder of an unborn child, financial fraud. Do you have documentation?" Emma pulled out a USB drive. "Everything is here. Financial records, messages, the evidence about his first wife." Catherine plugged the drive into her computer and began scrolling through files. Her expression grew more serious with each document she opened. "This is," she paused, searching for words. "This is enough to put him away for life." Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. So you can help me. I can do more than help you. I can bury him. Catherine leaned forward. But we need to be extremely careful. A man like Richard Blackwell has resources. He has connections. If he finds out you are planning to leave, if he suspects for even a moment that you have this evidence, your life will be in danger. Emma nodded. I understand. We will file the paperwork in 72 hours. Until then, you need to act completely normal. No changes in behavior, no packing bags, no contacting anyone he might be monitoring. I have one friend, Emma said, Grace Mitchell. She is a nurse, and she is the only person Richard has not managed to isolate me from. Can you trust her absolutely with my life? Catherine handed Emma a business card. Call her. Tell her everything. Have her ready to help you leave when the time comes. But Emma, Catherine's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Do not confront your husband. Do not give him any reason to suspect. Abusers become most dangerous when they feel they are losing control. Emma tucked the card into her purse. I will be careful. She left the office feeling lighter than she had in years. Finally, there was hope. In 72 hours, she would be free. Second value lesson. Here is your second lesson: never confront an abuser alone. Build your escape team first. Identify trusted friends. Secure legal representation. Locate a safe place to go. Plan your exit in complete silence, because the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when the victim tries to leave. That evening, Emma met Grace Mitchell at a coffee shop far from the Blackwell estate. Grace was her oldest friend, a trauma nurse at Hartford General who had seen the worst of humanity and still managed to maintain her compassion. My God, Emma, Grace whispered after hearing everything. I knew something was wrong. I have known for years. But murder? He killed Sarah. Emma's voice was steady now, calm with the certainty of someone who had finally accepted the truth. And he is planning to kill me. Grace reached across the table and gripped Emma's hands. What do you need a place to go when the paperwork is filed? Somewhere he cannot find me. Grace nodded. I know people. There is a network. Emma. Women who help other women escape situations like yours. We call ourselves Sisters in Survival. I can have a safe house ready within 48 hours. For the first time in months, Emma smiled. A real smile. Not the performance she gave at charity galas. Thank you. You are going to survive this. Grace squeezed her hands tighter. And that baby is going to grow up knowing the strongest mother in the world. Emma drove home that night, feeling something she had not felt in years. Hope. She walked through the front door of the Blackwell estate and found Richard waiting in the foyer. His expression was perfectly pleasant. His voice was completely calm. Darling, he said, I had an interesting phone call today. Emma's blood turned to ice. Someone contacted Morrison and Associates, asking about divorce proceedings. Richard stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You would not know anything about that. Would you? Emma forced herself to breathe, to keep her expression neutral. I do not know what you are talking about. Richard smiled, the smile that had charmed her at their first meeting, the smile she now recognized as the mask of a predator. I have friends in every law firm in this city. Emma, every law firm. Did you really think you could make moves without me knowing? He reached out and took her purse from her shoulder. Emma watched, frozen, as he searched through it. He found Catherine Morrison's business card. He found the parking receipt from the downtown garage. Richard held up the card between two fingers. Pack your things, he said softly. We are going on a little trip. You and I need to have a conversation about loyalty. Emma opened her mouth to protest, but Richard's hand closed around her wrist with crushing force. And do not even think about running. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. Because I know where Grace Mitchell lives. I know where her children go to school. I know everything about everyone you have ever cared about. Emma felt her hope crumble into dust. The trap was closing. Chapter 4: Prisoner. The next 3 days were the longest of Emma's life. Richard did not take her anywhere that first night. Instead, he locked her in their bedroom with a smile and explained the new rules of her existence. You will not leave this house without my permission. Your phone stays with me. Your car keys are mine. You will smile and wave at the security cameras, so I know you're not causing trouble. Richard, please. Emma tried to keep her voice steady. I am 7 months pregnant. I need medical care. I will bring a doctor here. Someone who works for me. Someone who understands discretion. Richard straightened his tie in the mirror. You brought this on yourself, Emma. All I asked was for a loyal wife. Instead, I got a cheater and a schemer. I never cheated on you. The baby is yours. Richard laughed. That is biologically impossible. I made certain of that a decade ago. Vasectomies can reverse. Emma pleaded. It is rare, but it happens. Call any doctor. They will tell you. For a moment, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the beginning of fear. Then his expression hardened again. It does not matter whose baby it is, he said. What matters is that you tried to leave me, and no one leaves Richard Blackwell. He walked out of the room. Emma heard the lock click into place. The days blurred together. Emma was allowed supervised trips to the bathroom and kitchen. She ate meals while Victoria watched from the doorway, smirking. She slept in her own bed while Richard stayed in a guest room, only visiting to remind her of his control. On the second day, Victoria came to torment her personally. The mistress pushed open the bedroom door and stood there, wearing one of Emma's necklaces, her expression dripping with satisfaction. You know what the funny thing is? Victoria leaned against the doorframe. I used to feel sorry for you. Poor little Emma, trapped in this big house with nothing but her charity work and her designer clothes. But now I see you for what you really are. A schemer, a manipulator, just like every other woman. Emma said nothing. She had learned that engaging with Victoria only made things worse. Richard told me everything, Victoria continued. About the lawyer, about your little friend Grace. He is going to destroy them both. You know, Catherine Morrison will never practice law again. And Grace, Victoria smiled. Well, accidents happen to nurses who get involved in other people's business. Emma's hands curled into fists at her sides. Leave them alone. They have nothing to do with this. They have everything to do with this. Victoria stepped closer. They tried to help you escape. That makes them enemies of the Blackwell family. And we do not tolerate enemies. On the third night, something changed. Emma was lying in bed, one hand on her stomach, feeling her baby kick, when she heard raised voices from downstairs. Richard was arguing with someone on the phone. His voice carried through the old house's walls. I do not care what he thinks. I built this company. Uncle Ted can rot in his mansion for all I care. There was a pause, and then Richard's voice rose higher. He is investigating what no. No, that is impossible. I covered every trail. Emma listened intently. Uncle Ted. She knew the name. Theodore Blackwell, Richard's 70-year-old uncle, the actual patriarch of the Blackwell fortune. Richard had always dismissed him as a senile old man clinging to past glory. But now, from the panic in Richard's voice, it seemed Uncle Ted was more formidable than Richard had believed. This changes things, she heard Richard say. We need to move faster. Tonight. The phone call ended. Footsteps approached the bedroom. Richard unlocked the door and stepped inside. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with barely contained rage. Get dressed, he ordered. Warm clothes. Dark colors. Where are we going? Richard grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the closet. Somewhere private. Somewhere we can finish this conversation without interruptions. 20 minutes later, Emma found herself in the back seat of Richard's SUV, driving into the darkness. Victoria followed in her own car, headlights cutting through the night behind them. Emma watched the familiar streets of their neighborhood disappear, replaced by industrial roads and abandoned buildings. Her hand never left her stomach. Wherever they were going, Emma knew she might not come back. Chapter 5. The Mill the Blackwell. Textile mill had been closed for 40 years. Once it had employed half the town, turning raw cotton into fabric that clothed the nation. Now it stood as a monument to decay, its windows shattered, its walls crumbling, its machinery rusted into silence. Richard parked beside the main entrance and killed the engine. Victoria pulled up beside them, her headlights illuminating the graffiti-covered doors. "This is where my grandfather built his fortune," Richard said, almost to himself. "Do you know how he maintained discipline among the workers? He used a whip. 100 lashes for theft, 50 for insubordination. He believed in consequences." Emma said nothing. Her throat was too tight with fear to speak. "I found his whip last year," Richard continued, "hidden in the family vault with his other treasures. I cleaned it, oiled the leather, kept it ready for the day I might need it." He turned to face Emma, and in the dim light, she saw something terrifying in his eyes. The mask had finally fallen away. There was no charm left, no pretense of civilization, only cold, calculating cruelty. "You betrayed me, Emma. You tried to leave me. You tried to take everything I have built." Richard opened his door. "Now you are going to learn what happens to people who cross the Blackwell family." The interior of the mill was worse than Emma had imagined. The smell of mold and decay hung heavy in the air. Rats scattered at the sound of their footsteps. The floor was covered with broken glass and rotting wood. Victoria walked ahead, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the path. She led them to a clearing in the center of the building, a space that might once have been a supervisor's station. Here, the floor was concrete, solid enough to stand on. Richard positioned Emma in the center of the clearing. He walked to a corner and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, the leather gleamed in Victoria's flashlight beam. A bullwhip, nearly 8 feet long, the kind that could split skin with a single stroke. "Richard," Emma whispered, "please, think about what you are doing. I am pregnant. Your child is inside me. Not my child." Richard tested the whip, snapping it through the air. The crack echoed through the empty mill like a gunshot. "Never my child." Victoria raised her phone and began recording. "For posterity," she said with a smile. Third value lesson. Here is your third lesson, and it is the most important one of all. If you recognize the warning signs of abuse, do not wait for it to escalate. The red flags Emma ignored for years, the controlling behavior, the isolation from friends and family, the gradual erosion of her independence. These are patterns that repeat in countless relationships. Trust your instincts. Get help, because situations like this rarely get better on their own. They almost always get worse. The first lash caught Emma across her shoulders. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. A burning line of fire that stole her breath and dropped her to her knees. 1, Victoria counted. Emma tried to crawl away, but there was nowhere to go. Richard circled her like a predator, the whip coiling and uncoiling in his hands. The second lash came, then the third, then the fourth. Emma stopped counting after 20. She stopped screaming after 50. She simply curled around her baby, using her own body as a shield, and prayed for it to end. Through the haze of agony, she heard Victoria laughing. She heard Richard breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from excitement. She felt her blood soaking through her clothes and pooling on the concrete floor. At 97, Richard paused. 3 more, Victoria said eagerly. "Finish it." Richard raised the whip. 98 cracked across Emma's back. 99 followed immediately after. And then, with a final brutal stroke, 100, Emma collapsed completely, her cheek pressed against the cold concrete, her vision darkening at the edges. She could barely breathe. Every nerve in her body screamed in protest, but her hand remained pressed against her stomach, and beneath her palm, she felt movement, weak, but present. Her baby was still alive. Richard lowered the whip and stared down at his wife. There was no remorse in his expression, no humanity at all. "Leave her," he said to Victoria. "She will be dead by morning. The rats will take care of the rest." They turned and walked toward the exit. their footsteps echoing through the darkness. Emma lay alone in the abandoned mill, bleeding and broken, surrounded by nothing but silence and shadows. She was going to die here. Her baby was going to die here, and no one would ever know what happened. Chapter 6. False Salvation. Emma did not know how long she lay on that cold concrete floor. Minutes. Maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness. But something inside her refused to give up. Some spark of survival that had carried her through 5 years of marriage to a monster, that had kept her smiling at charity galas while hiding bruises beneath designer sleeves. She was not dead yet, and as long as she was breathing, she had a chance. Emma dragged herself across the floor, inch by agonizing inch. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain cascading through her body. Blood left a dark trail behind her, glistening in the faint moonlight that filtered through broken windows. She did not know what she was looking for until she found it. In what had once been a supervisor's office, sitting on a dust-covered desk, was an old landline telephone. It was ancient, a rotary model that probably predated her parents. But when Emma lifted the receiver with trembling hands, she heard something miraculous. A dial tone. The mill still had working phone lines. Forgotten. Unpaid. But somehow still connected to the outside world. Emma's fingers shook violently as she dialed 911. The rotary dial felt like it took forever, each number requiring more strength than she possessed. But finally, the call connected. 911. What is your emergency? Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. Please, help me. I am at the old Blackwell mill. I have been beaten. I am pregnant. Please. Ma'am, stay on the line. We are tracing your location now. Help is on the way. Tears streamed down Emma's face. For the second time in a week, she felt hope blooming in her chest. She had done it. She had survived. She had found a way to save herself and her baby. Can you tell me your name? Ma'am, Emma. Emma Sullivan. My husband. He attacked me. Please hurry. The operator's voice was calm and reassuring. Officers are being dispatched right now. Just stay on the line and keep talking to me. Emma closed her eyes and let herself breathe. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Richard would be arrested. Victoria would be arrested. She would recover, have her baby, rebuild her life. She had won. And then she heard footsteps, not the heavy boots of police officers, the sharp click of high heels on concrete. Victoria Crane emerged from the shadows, her phone still in her hand, a smile spreading across her face like a disease. Nice try, sweetheart. She reached down and ripped the phone from Emma's hands. The receiver clattered against the desk as Victoria smashed it into pieces. No, Emma gasped. Richard owns half the police department in this town. Victoria crouched beside Emma, close enough that Emma could smell her perfume. Every emergency call is monitored by his people. Who do you think told me you were still alive? Emma's hope shattered into 1,000 pieces. I was waiting outside. Victoria continued. Richard wanted me to make sure you did not try anything clever. And look at you, crawling around, trying to be a hero. She shook her head in mock disappointment. You really thought you could beat him? Did you not? Victoria pulled out her phone and started recording again. Let me get some footage of this. The desperate wife, bleeding on the floor, crying for help that will never come. Richard will love this. Emma tried to speak, but no words came. The fight was draining out of her. Every ounce of strength she had summoned for that phone call was gone, leaving only exhaustion and despair. You know what the best part is? Victoria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. After you die, I am going to raise your baby as my own. I will tell that child its mother was a drug addict who abandoned it. Your baby will call me Mommy, and you will be nothing but a forgotten footnote in Blackwell family history. Victoria stood and brushed dust off her designer jeans. Sleep tight, Emma, or do not. Either way, I will see you in hell. She walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete, leaving Emma alone in the darkness once more. This time, there was no phone to call, no hope to cling to, no miracle waiting in the shadows. Emma pressed her hand against her stomach and felt her baby moving weakly inside her. "I am sorry," she whispered through cracked lips. "Mommy tried." Chapter 7, A Mother's Fury. 20 miles away, in a glass tower that dominated the Hartford skyline, Margaret Sullivan sat alone in her corner office. The city sprawled below her, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Millions of lives unfolding in apartments and offices and restaurants. But Maggie's attention was fixed on a single red dot on her computer screen. The dot represented a GPS tracker hidden inside a silver necklace. 15 years ago, when Maggie had made the impossible decision to distance herself from her daughter to protect her from dangerous enemies, she had given Emma that necklace. "This has my heart in it," Maggie had said. "Never take it off." Emma never had. The dot had not moved in 4 hours. Its location was deep in an industrial zone on the outskirts of the city, in a cluster of abandoned buildings that had once belonged to the Blackwell family. Maggie's instincts, honed by decades in the intelligence business, screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. She picked up her phone and dialed. Daniel Cole answered on the first ring. "Boss code red," Maggie said, her voice flat and controlled despite the fear twisting in her chest. "My daughter. Blackwell property, Sector 7, the old textile mill." There was a pause as Daniel processed the information. "Team mobilizing. ETA 12 minutes. Make it 8. Maggie ended the call and stood. She walked to a hidden panel in her wall and pressed her palm against the scanner. The panel slid open to reveal a small arsenal of weapons and tactical equipment. She selected a handgun, checked the magazine, and slid it into a holster beneath her jacket. Then she made one more call. An elderly voice answered. "Margaret, it has been 15 years. "Ted," Maggie said, "your nephew just tried to murder my daughter." Silence stretched across the line. Theodore Blackwell, patriarch of the Blackwell fortune, the man who had built an empire while his nephew played at being important, absorbed the words. "I am listening," he said finally. "I have evidence he has been embezzling from Blackwell Industries for a decade. $47 million moved to offshore accounts. I also have evidence he murdered his first wife. Sarah did not die in an accident. Richard paid a mechanic to cut her brake lines." More silence. Then, "How do you know this? I know everything about everyone in this city." "Ted, that is my job. And right now, your nephew is in that abandoned mill with my daughter. And if anything happens to her, I'm going to burn the Blackwell name to the ground." Ted's voice hardened. "What do you need access to the mill property? And when this is over, I want Richard to lose everything. His money, his freedom, his legacy, everything." "Done." Maggie grabbed her coat and headed for the elevator. Her convoy was already waiting in the underground garage. 3 armored SUVs with engines running and armed teams inside. She climbed into the lead vehicle and nodded to Daniel Cole, who sat in the driver's seat. "Move," she said. The convoy exploded out of the garage and onto the city streets. Traffic parted before them like waves before a ship. Maggie sat in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the red dot that still had not moved. 15 years ago, she had left her daughter to protect her from the dangerous world Maggie inhabited. She had built Sullivan's security into the most powerful intelligence network on the eastern seaboard, hoping that distance would keep Emma safe. She had been wrong. Now she was going to make it right. Chapter 8, The Rescue. The convoy arrived at the Blackwell textile mill 11 minutes after Maggie's initial call. Daniel Cole had driven like a man possessed, taking corners at speeds that should have been impossible, navigating industrial roads with perfect precision. 3 black SUVs surrounded the building. Armed men in tactical gear poured out, their movements silent and coordinated. They had trained for operations exactly like this one, breaching hostile territory, neutralizing threats, extracting targets. But this was not just another operation. This was the boss's daughter. Maggie stepped out of the lead vehicle before Daniel could stop her. She was not armed with just a handgun now. One of her men had handed her a vest and a radio. She looked like what she was, the commander of a private army. Entry in 30 seconds. Daniel reported through his earpiece. No visual on hostiles. The building appears empty. She is in there, Maggie said. I know she is. The team approached the main entrance. On Maggie's signal, they breached the door with explosive force. The ancient wood splintered and collapsed inward, sending decades of dust swirling into the air. Flashlights cut through the darkness. The beams swept across rotting machinery and broken walls. Searching. Contact. Someone called out. Northwest corner. One person down. Maggie pushed past her men and ran toward the coordinates. Her tactical training told her to hang back, to let the professionals secure the area first, but her maternal instincts overrode everything else. She found Emma lying in a pool of blood, curled around her pregnant stomach, barely breathing. For a moment, Maggie's iron composure cracked. Tears blurred her vision as she dropped to her knees beside her daughter. Emma, baby, can you hear me? Emma's eyes fluttered open. Even through the haze of pain and blood loss, recognition dawned on her face. Mom, the word was barely a whisper, but it hit Maggie like a physical blow. I am here, baby. Maggie gathered Emma into her arms as gently as she could, mindful of the wounds that covered her back. I am here. No one is ever going to hurt you again. Around them, the tactical team secured the perimeter. Daniel Cole was already calling for medical evacuation. His voice clipped and professional despite the horror of what they had found. 100 lashes. Maggie counted as she examined her daughter's injuries. The marks were precise, evenly spaced, delivered with the kind of methodical cruelty that suggested pleasure rather than anger. Who did this? Maggie's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the softness. Richard and Victoria. She filmed everything. Where are they now? They left. Thought I would be dead by morning. Maggie looked up at Daniel Cole. Find them, she said. Now. Daniel nodded and began issuing orders into his radio. Within minutes, the Sullivan security network activated across the city. Surveillance cameras, traffic monitors, cell phone tracking, all of it mobilized to locate two individuals who had made the fatal mistake of crossing Margaret Sullivan. The medical team arrived and began treating Emma's wounds. They established an IV line, dressed the worst of the lacerations, and prepared her for transport. Through it all, Maggie held her daughter's hand. The baby, Emma whispered. Is the baby okay? One of the medics placed a portable fetal monitor on Emma's stomach. The room fell silent as everyone waited. Then, like the most beautiful music Maggie had ever heard, a steady heartbeat filled the air. Strong and regular, defiant in the face of everything that had tried to destroy it. The baby is fine, the medic said. Strong heartbeat, no signs of distress. Emma closed her eyes as tears streamed down her face. For the first time that night, they were tears of relief. Chapter 9, Justice. The next 72 hours unfolded like a precision military operation. Richard Blackwell and Victoria Crane were located within 6 hours of the rescue. They had fled to Richard's beach house in Rhode Island, apparently confident that Emma would be dead before anyone found her. They were wrong. Local police, coordinated by calls from Theodore Blackwell himself, arrived at the beach house just before dawn. Richard was arrested in his silk pajamas, his face a mask of disbelief as officers read him his rights. Victoria was taken into custody while screaming about lawyers and false accusations. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Victoria's phone contained hours of footage documenting the assault. Richard's own devices revealed the messages about murdering Emma, the plans to harm the baby, and the financial trail connecting him to Sarah Blackwell's death 8 years earlier. At Hartford General Hospital, Emma recovered slowly. Her physical wounds would heal with time, though the scars on her back would remain forever. The psychological wounds would take longer, but she was not alone. Maggie stayed by her bedside around the clock, making up for 15 years of absence in every small gesture. Grace Mitchell visited daily, bringing flowers and news from the Sisters in Survival Network. Theodore Blackwell sent a handwritten letter expressing his horror at his nephew's actions, and pledging full support for Emma's recovery. The trial came 3 weeks later. Emma walked into the Hartford Superior Courthouse on her own 2 feet, her mother on one side, her best friend on the other. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly straining against the simple black dress she had chosen for the occasion. The courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread across the country, drawing attention from domestic violence advocates, true crime enthusiasts, and millions of ordinary people who wanted to see justice served. Richard Blackwell sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the charming billionaire he had once presented himself as. 3 weeks in pre-trial detention had stripped away his polish. His hair was unkempt. His face was hollow. The confidence that had defined him was gone. Victoria Crane sat at a separate table, having turned on Richard completely in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony, combined with the video evidence and financial records, left no room for doubt. The prosecution presented its case with devastating efficiency. Medical experts described Emma's injuries in clinical detail. Financial investigators traced the embezzlement and the payments to the mechanic who had sabotaged Sarah Blackwell's car. Psychologists testified about the patterns of abuse that Emma had endured for years. And then Emma herself took the stand. She spoke clearly and calmly, describing the fear, the isolation, the gradual erosion of everything she had once been. She talked about the night in the mill, about the cold concrete floor, about the crack of the whip and the sound of Victoria counting. But most powerfully, she talked about survival. "I am not here for revenge," Emma said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "I am here because there are thousands of women trapped in situations like mine. Women who believe they have no way out. Women who think no one will help them. I want them to know that survival is possible, that justice exists, that they are not alone." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Richard Preston Blackwell III was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, financial fraud. And after the evidence about Sarah Blackwell was presented, murder in the first degree, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. Victoria Crane received 18 years for her role as an accomplice. As Richard was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he passed Emma's row. For a moment, their eyes met. Emma expected to see hatred, or rage, or the same cold cruelty that had haunted her for 5 years. Instead, she saw fear. The fear of a man who had finally realized that his actions had consequences. Emma did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply watched as the monster who had tried to destroy her was led to his fate. Fourth value lesson. Here is your fourth lesson. It is never too late to ask for help. It is never too late to start over. If you or someone you love is experiencing domestic violence, please know that resources exist. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call them at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. Your life is worth fighting for. Chapter 10. New Beginnings. 6 months later, the nursery was painted soft yellow, filled with afternoon sunlight that streamed through windows overlooking a peaceful garden. Emma sat in a rocking chair, her newborn daughter cradled against her chest, watching the tiny face with wonder. Grace Abigail Sullivan had been born 3 weeks ago, healthy and strong. With her mother's dark eyes and her grandmother's determined chin, she had entered the world screaming at the top of her lungs, and Emma had cried tears of joy at the sound. Now, as Emma rocked her daughter gently, she reflected on everything that had brought her to this moment. The settlement from the Blackwell estate had been substantial. Theodore Blackwell had personally overseen the transfer of assets, ensuring that Emma received compensation not just for herself, but for Sarah Blackwell's family as well. He had cut ties with Richard completely, publicly stating that the Blackwell name would be rebuilt on integrity rather than cruelty. Emma had used part of the money to buy a house far from Connecticut, in a quiet neighborhood where she could raise her daughter in peace. She had used another part to hire the best therapists and counselors, working through the trauma that would take years to fully process. But the largest portion of her settlement went to a new project, A project that gave her purpose when the nightmares woke her at 3 in the morning. A project that transformed her pain into something meaningful. A knock at the nursery door interrupted her thoughts. Maggie Sullivan entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "How is my granddaughter?" Maggie asked, settling into the chair beside Emma. "Perfect. She just finished eating." Emma adjusted the baby in her arms, marveling at the tiny fingers that curled around her thumb. Maggie smiled, and for a moment, she looked nothing like the formidable intelligence operative she had been for 30 years. She looked like what she was, a grandmother, a mother who had finally reconnected with her daughter, a woman who had spent 15 years in the shadows, watching, protecting, waiting. "I got a call from the foundation this morning," Maggie said. "The shelter is ready to open next week." Emma nodded. After everything that had happened, she had known exactly what she wanted to do with her new beginning. The Sullivan Women's Shelter would provide housing, legal assistance, and support services for domestic violence survivors. It would be staffed by people who understood the unique challenges of escaping an abusive relationship, and it would be funded well enough to never turn anyone away. "Have you decided on the name?" Maggie asked. Emma looked down at her daughter. "Grace Abigail," she said, "named after the friend who never gave up on me." Maggie set down her tea and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper. "I have something for her," Maggie said. "A tradition." Emma opened the box. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a tiny silver necklace, a perfect miniature of the one Emma had worn for 15 years. "Every Sullivan woman should have protection," Maggie said with a slight smile. Emma laughed, genuine and warm, a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. "You put a tracker in it, did you not?" "Maybe." They sat together in the sunlit nursery, 3 generations of Sullivan women. Outside, birds sang in the garden. Inside, baby Grace made soft sounds as she drifted towards sleep. Emma thought about all the roads that had led to this moment. The pain, the fear, the despair, the crawl across a cold concrete floor, the hand pressed against her stomach, protecting the life within her. She thought about the women she would help through the foundation, the survivors who would walk through the shelter's doors, broken and afraid, and walk out again with hope. She thought about the message she wanted her daughter to understand. "The world can be cruel," Emma whispered to her sleeping baby. "There are people who will try to hurt you, to control you, to make you believe you are worthless, but you come from a line of strong women, women who survive, women who fight back, women who protect the people they love." Grace stirred slightly, her tiny hand tightening around Emma's finger. "You are never alone," Emma continued. "You have me, you have your grandmother. You have an entire network of women who stand ready to help. And no matter what happens, no matter how dark things get, remember that you are stronger than you know." Maggie reached over and placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. "I am proud of you," Maggie said simply. Emma leaned into her mother's touch. 3 simple words, carrying the weight of 15 years of separation, of guilt, of fierce protective love. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Emma watched the colors change, her daughter warm against her chest, her mother solid beside her. A year ago, she had been a prisoner in a golden cage. 6 months ago, she had been bleeding on a factory floor, certain she was going to die. Now she was free, healed, whole, and she was just getting started. Final reflection. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If it moved you, if it reminded you that survival is possible, if it gave you hope, then please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And remember the lessons we learned together. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Build your escape team before you need it. Never confront an abuser alone. And no matter how trapped you feel, know that help exists. Know that you are worthy of love and safety. Know that your story does not have to end in darkness. The next chapter is yours to write. Closing call to action. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment below telling me what you thought. Hit the subscribe button and that notification bell so you never miss a new video. And if you know someone who might need to hear this story, please share it with them. I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and remember that you are never ever alone. That's to you.